All right, so now we're on the process of just kind of tidying things up in our scene. So this is going to be where you're going to end up. And this is going to be a pretty big image. If I zoom in all the way, you can see my zoom down here. You can see how close I can get to my stuff. Plenty of detail inside the scene. So how did we finish this up? Oops. I'm going to jump out of my camera. And let's look at some of the things here. Okay. So one thing is the plane here. I really wasn't happy with the way that the other one turned out with the bevel. So I created this a little bit differently. I used a bend on this. So you can see that I have this little bend handle here. And if I click on the bend and then I adjust it, and see how I can adjust the bend of this. Okay, so you actually get a pretty decent looking cave when you do that. So let me show how I did that. I'm just going to turn this one off. There we go. So I created a plane. I made it big. Okay, obviously we have to adjust the sizing of this. Pull that out. We don't need so much the front of this, right? Because the front's just, you know, we don't see it. And then there's the back. And then on the divisions for this, I went to display and made sure my shading lines were on so I could see the divisions. And then I pulled the width segments down because we don't need any width segments because we're not bending it that way. And then I cranked the height segments up. Okay, so that helps you get a nice smooth curve. And then I went to here and added a bend. Now, anytime you use any of these deformers, you drop it inside. So I drop it into the plane so the bend is under here. Oops. Now what I'm going to do is I need to resize the bend. So I'm going to go to my scale tool and just scale it up. Now it's going to go kind of slow if you just do this. So if you hold down Shift, it's going to go a bit quicker. There we go. And what I need to do is this little nub that's on top, that has to lay down with this. So I'm going to go to my bend again. I'm going to go to my coordinates. And I could rotate it like that. And then just round this to a -90. All right, switch back to my scale tool. Now if you scale it like this, it's going to just scale it uniformly in all directions. If you click on the bend and you go to these scales, it'll do it just one at a time. Okay, so that's what I'm doing, is just scaling it up so that it fits it this way. Oops. And I can just scale it that way. And then I'm going to scale it up in the Y direction. And obviously it's going to be pretty big, so like probably not 300. T40. All right. No, we're almost there. So if I went to 20, then I could switch to my move tool and just scoot it down. Okay, so what I want to do is scoot the box so that this end of the box is past my geometry. Okay, so it's way past it here, so I'm not going to bend any of that. Then I'm going to middle click so I can get into one of my side views. And then I just drag this handlebar up. Okay, and you can see that as I'm doing that, it is definitely bending this shape. And obviously you got to be a little subtle with it. Now the height of the box here is too much, so I'm getting this really weird bend. So I'm going to go back to my bend, go back to my scale, and take this size Z down to like 0.2, 0.1. And I think I'm going to scale it up even further, maybe like 60 or so. Now I'm just adjusting the scale. I'm going to go to the object. And I could also adjust the strength here. There we go. And then nudge this down a bit. So I undid a couple steps and went back to my other one, because the other one was acting kind of funky. You can see that my bend handle here is just basically like right in the center. And then all I have to do is grab this handle and pull it up. And we get a nice bend right in there. Okay, so if you're not liking the way that the other one's turning out, you can definitely do this. Now I can move the bend deformer, change where this bend is happening. That's the idea with it. And then the plane too, you can move this and it'll move both of them. So what you want to do is make sure you're not cutting off your food. So you can see how it's cutting into it. Let's pull that back. There we go. And there we go. So that's how we make our bend deformer. Okay, so we just made a plane, made this bend, and then kind of sized it. Oops, the problem on the other ones, I sized it maybe too big. Yeah, size it just kind of fit the area you want it to bend in. All right, cool. Bend. Yeah, I don't think I like that I scaled it either. Alright, yeah, so don't scale it. Just scale it regular, not with the other one. I can scale it this way, and that's no big deal, it works. But using this bend and these scales, it's not liking that. Alright. So maybe just a glitch on mine, but right now it doesn't seem to be liking that look. Okay, so then you want to organize your stuff. So where's your cereal, where's your juice, everything. My cereal box I'm actually going to rotate a bit more. I like to have a little bit more on an angle. My cereal bowl, I actually shrunk down some of the stuff. The bowl itself, you can see the milk is kind of like floating here. There's nothing touching these two sides. You don't really see it. But it's stuff you want to look out for. So I'm going to go back to my points here. See, that's all I'm selected. And in my top view, I can just go to scale and scale this in. Okay, just to bring it in so that we don't see any of those edges. There we go. Cool. All right, so that's good. There's my coffee, kind of reposition it. Make sure that if you need to move something around, you grab the group and move it. So you're going to the coffee and you're moving the coffee. You're rotating it. You're trying to find a good angle for all this stuff in your shot. And what I do is I initially set up my camera to be kind of back here. Okay, and we did that in the last video because we got the same size proportions. So this is an 8x10. And your resolution right now is 300. I'm going to set it to 50 because it's good to do these lower resolution tests. If you try to set this to 300 and render that out, it's not going to be quick. Okay, so we'll make a camera like we've done before. Boom, click the camera button. There it is. And under my, oops, I'm looking through the camera. There we go. Under my focal length, you can play with the focal length. So remember, going down like this will give us more of a perspective look. So it'll appear like the close stuff is really close and the far stuff is really far. It distorts it too. And then remember, you can go the other way and it'll kind of flatten out the stuff in your scene. Okay, so you got to find a good value where it shows off all your stuff and all your stuff is still laid out. You can see the darker lines here and here. All the stuff is lined up inside those areas. I'll close that. I'm going to take my juice cup and just kind of shove it back a little bit. There we go. maybe a little bit more over this way. There we go. So my cereal box fits here, that fits there. And then I like to zoom out just a little bit more. I can always crop it in Photoshop, but I want to make sure that I have a good positioning of all this stuff. Cool. All right. And I did drop a material on my background that's just a flat material. Okay. Everything else has its own material that we already discussed. I do have a couple lights in my scene, so let me click my camera button to get out of the camera. And then I have two lights. One light is up here. Okay. Details. It's an area light. The intensity right now is 100. The shadows are area lights. And on the shadow, I knock the density down to 40%. If it's at 100, the shadow area come in really dark. And it was just too dark for what I wanted. Okay. And then the same thing, if I can grab the other light, there you go. On the other light is that we have 70% density on the area light, and then the values and intensities are all the same. Okay. And then I also added in an environment. Now what I did with the environment is just adding this, so that I would get a little bit of extra reflection in some of my objects. So the way you do it is create environment, and it basically creates this environment for you. And then you will drop in a material. So I made a new material, and I found this picture. Yeah, you can kind of see it right there. If I added the image, there we go. And this is, again, it's just something to help reflect into our materials so that it looks like there's, you know, more going on than just nothing. It'll really add to the scene. You can find these on SIBL space HDRI. And you can go to Civil Archives, HDR Labs. And then you can find something that would be appropriate for your scene. Come on. So they have Walk of Fame, they have waterfalls, winter forests. Okay. So obviously some of these are, you know, a little bit more location specific that you may not want to be reflecting into your stuff. So it always helps just to have something. So this is kind of like a hall or outside of a hall. So just like, I like the lights in it. I like the layout of some of the lines in here. I just thought that was nice to add into the scene. Back to cinema. There we go. All right, so camera set up, lights are set up, environment set up. Let's go to our render settings. All right, so like I said, keep it at 8x10 just to kind of play with things. And 50 resolution. Under save, find a spot for it. So Sarcona _ serial scene. And then this is going to be a TIFF, 8-bit channels, name.number.extension is fine. We're only doing a still, but still keep the name.number in case you need to come back to a specific frame. Alpha channels on, all good. Not doing anything with multipass. Anti-aliasing we're going to set to best. So 1x1, 4x4 should be good. I do want to come down and add ambient occlusion. So under effect, I'm going to add ambient occlusion. And because I already did, it's not there, but it will be right there. Once you add it, this just drops in, and we pretty much don't need to change anything. The only thing you may need to change is this maximum ray length. This is the size of your scene. So if you're not seeing a difference between this and this, then you may have your ambient occlusion set too low. All right, so I'm gonna jump into my camera, and then I'm gonna hit the Shift R to render it out into my viewer. And you can see how quickly this is going to go. For the most part, when you get to your juice, it's going to go slower because you have transparency on it, so it's going to take longer to do. So this part here will be the longest in the scene. So we just have to kind of give this a little bit of time to calculate what's going on. All right, so I'm going to give it a second, and then we'll come back. All right, so this is the finished scene here. Now what I also did is I went ahead and rendered out. Here it is without the environment, and for this specific scene, there's not a whole lot the environment is actually doing. I typically like to have an environment in there anyway, in case I need it. You can see it's kind of subtle. There's a couple of pixels kind of moving around here. And in a bigger scene and on our final file will actually be a little bit more apparent. But in this one, we're not seeing a huge difference. And then the final one that I'm showing here, this is with and without ambient occlusion. So this is without, so you can see our bowl looks like it's kind of floating. And then when ambient occlusion is on, you can see that these things feel a little bit more grounded into our scene. Okay, so at this point you could adjust anything. All right, so I could adjust the color of my orange juice, the glass, the straw, the cup, my bowl, and you can see on my bowl I actually did add a texture to it. So this is just a noise texture that I put on there just to give it something. My cereal box, anything. So if I need to adjust any of these materials or objects or anything, I can just close this. I'm going to turn my ambient occlusion back on. Go into each one of these, and then you can adjust whatever it is you need to adjust. Okay, and then that'll update, and then when you go to render, then you're all good. You don't need to drop it back onto anything. You just adjust this, and then that'll take care of it. Okay, so here's that bowl. So I did Venus, which is like a noise pattern, and you have this black to white right here. And then on the cereal bowl, I did flat, and then that gave me that really neat texture. And then I just tweaked some of these settings down here just to make it look like it has a kind of spinning pattern. All right. So you may need to adjust things like reflections. You may need to adjust things like refractions. You may need to adjust their speculars. If you find your cereal is maybe a little bit too reflective, you may want to come into the specularity and just kind of roughen this up more. Okay, and if you do it for one of the cereals, you should probably do it for all of them because they're all pretty much the same. Yeah, I think that one cereal must have been I don't know why this one was a different one. So it's back to layers. This one. They all don't have to be exactly the same, but obviously they should have a similar look to them, seeing as how they're all made of the same stuff. Okay. So there's a couple of things that I noticed that I wanted to knock that down. Window, picture viewer, to bring that back up. There we go. My mug looks good. I could probably knock some of the reflection down on it just so I get a little bit more of the blue coming up. So I find my mug. I just pull this reflection strength down. Maybe go to the color. Alright, that's coming from that, so that's good. Alright, so that should be good. So that should give me more of the blue from my actual cup in there. There we go. Okay. We can also do render region. So here is under render region. And then what we can do is just marquee a section. So if I marquee just this cup, what it's going to do is render out just that cup. So if I'm just trying to preview what the cup's going to look like after those changes, I can do just that. So you can see it definitely looks like it has less reflection. Okay, a little bit more true to that original blue color that we had. And I can do the same thing for the cereal. Just go back up to render region. Just render out just that one region so that we can see what it's looking like. Okay. Other things we may need to adjust. On my cereal box here, any textures that we bring in, there it is. There is this sampling here. And the sampling is basically just like this filter that goes on. So if I turn that off, there's no smoothing or filtering that's going to happen to this. So it makes it a little bit crisper. Okay. So I typically like to have that on there as well. But just like everything, rendering the region, testing out some of these areas will definitely help verify that it looks better. Okay, there it is there. Here it is here. Okay, so you can see the quality of this text and that text, where this looks a little bit chunky and blurry, and that looks obviously a bit crisper. And if I did a render region on here, you can definitely tell that this feels a lot more readable than that does. Okay, so just stuff to keep in mind as you're working, things that you want to adjust as you're doing your stuff. So once you're happy with the layout of your stuff, once you're happy with the textures and everything else you've done. Then you go back to your render settings, back to output, take this back up to 300. So by the time you're done, you'll have a 2400 by 3000 pixel image. Make sure your save is saving it to your spot. Make sure your anti-aliasing is at best 1 and 4. Make sure ambient occlusion is on. If you needed to adjust this number, you can. You could also adjust the darkness. Sometimes the black is just maybe a little bit too black. And you could always adjust, like click in the middle here and drag this back there. So you'll basically get like really dark areas, and then it'll brighten up a bit, like a bit quicker. Okay. All right. So then you just do a Shift R again, or render to picture viewer, and then that'll render to the picture viewer. Now once you're done, you can see mine, this one here, you'll get a pretty big image. Like this is this took 20 minutes to render. This is a 2400 by 3000 pixel image. In your folder, you should have that image. Okay, and then that's it. That's our assignment. Okay, so then you would just turn that in. So I'm gonna hit Shift R, and then that'll be the end of it. All right. So that's the end of your project. When you turn it in, you'll make sure you turn in your image. So make sure your image is in your folder. You can also right click on it here and save as if you needed to. So make sure you have this entire project folder with your image all turned in to the folder, to the server. You could also adjust things in Photoshop too, like if you want to take this image into Photoshop. All right, so here's my image from Photoshop. You could do things like, oops, come down here, like we could add a curves. So you want to darken some of the darks and lighten up some of the lights. We could do that. We could adjust our midtone some. Okay. We could add, let's say, hue and saturation if we needed to click on this and maybe desaturate something. Like if I didn't like how bright some of my food was in here, I may want to desaturate some of that or overly saturate it. So I want this yellow here to be a little bit more saturated. Okay, so lots of things we could play with on that one as well. We could also add in a new layer. My selection, there it is. Oops, let me clear my masks. And I'm just going to fill this with black and then blur it. It's good. And then I'm just going to invert it. Oops. I need a layer underneath the white. There we go. So I have this. Okay, so I'm gonna merge these together, invert it, just a Control I, so it gives me this image. And then I can take this to a multiply, and it creates a little vignette. Might be too dark, so I take the opacity down until I get a nice happy color. Maybe I'll take a levels on this too, just to kind of pull up where that white is. There we go. Okay, so there's our original image from Cinema. There's with some level or curves adjustment. Here's with a little vignette on there. If we want to do something a little bit more artistic also, let me go to this. I can go to the blur gallery and do an iris blur. And then basically what this does, it helps kind of fake a depth of field. Okay, so you can see how this is crystal clear, and as we get back to this corner, we've blurred that out a bit. So little things you can do in Photoshop. You don't need to do that for this one. You don't need to do the vignette or the curves for this one either. I just want you to see that you definitely could bring these into Photoshop and then tweak them and adjust and whatever else you need to do. I'm just going to call this adjusted so I know which one that is. All right, there we go. Okay, so that's it. So render your stuff out, save it, turn your stuff in, and that project is done, son. Cool. Make sure everything's labeled down here. Make sure all your stuff is grouped and organized up here and labeled. And then save it, obviously, with your name so that I know whose stuff is whose. And then you're good to go.